Trump supporters may not want to admit this, and they may rebel at the thought of this, but it is true. Everything that I'm going to say is true. Donald Trump did not do this country a service in the way that he ran this country. I mean, yes, from the standpoint of the number of deaths, that part, the 550,000, is bad in and of itself. But also from the antagonistic policies that he's accepted that basically created an axis that wasn't necessarily there prior. Meaning he was so obnoxious that countries like China and Russia, and for that matter, Cuba, even Syria, North Korea, those countries were basically locked together based on the sanctions that the United States was putting out, the belligerence that the U.S. was putting out on an other end. I mean, you basically had the situation where over and over again the U.S. was attacking various countries, either through bombing, either through sanctions, or just outright belligerence. And in that, you've created this weird fulcrum of power in this other sphere of the globe between Russia, China, and Iran. That union is not going to do a great service for the U.S. And I mean, from the standpoint of China and Iran, what they've just signed a 20-year agreement, and Russia and China are talking about putting a moon base or something to that effect. If you think of what is going to take place in the next, let's say, 10 years, China has 3 times our population. And what does that look like? The U.S. is talking about competition because at this point in their heads they're like, oh my God, we have to stop China before it gets out of the barn. Well, part of that would have been not to allow those 3 countries to end up forming a union because of how antagonistic you've been to those 3 countries. I mean, for God's sake, you're screaming that China's committing genocide. That's the level of hysteria that we're at this point. So, but Trump did that. And, you know, you've created this kind of weird space, even in the belligerence in South America. I mean, the coup that took place from the standpoint of Bolivia, the throwing Lula in prison. I mean, all of these things, the CIA fingerprints are on. And what do you think takes place when those governments get back in power? Putting Correa on Interpol, trying to get an arrest warrant for him in Ecuador from the standpoint of Moreno. I mean, this is the stuff that we were doing. But what is taking place right now? Syria didn't fall. Iran didn't fall, nor did it capitulate in regards to another deal. The U.S. lost. The U.S. had very specific wants. Those wants were not achieved with a muscular strategy. And now, in South America, you have Ecuador. That president looks like it's going to go back to Correa's party. You have Lula, who looks like he's going to run against Bolsonaro now that he's out of prison. And I would imagine he's going to have an axe to grind against the U.S. if he gets in power, which he probably will get in power if it's somewhat of a fair race, considering the number of people that have died as a result of Bolsonaro. Yeah, he probably has a good chance of winning, providing the military or something else doesn't get involved. You have the MAS party, Movement Socialism Party. That party has basically won in Bolivia, overturning the coup results, and the United States doesn't necessarily want to accept that that is a coup. If you're ever really looking for whether or not you're being fed propaganda, the way that the U.S. government talked about Bolivia, oh God, and not just the U.S. government, the way the newspapers talked about it, they talked about it entirely from a perspective of the U.S. interests. It ignored the fact that by every measure of the word, it was a coup, all the way down to massacres and people being thrown in the streets with their hair being shaved off by gangs of lunatics. But we backed it. And it is very bizarre, not bizarre at all, that the newspapers basically take some disposition that the government takes on this particular atrocity that's taking place. Well, the government is back in power from the standpoint of the one that the people wanted by like 10 points or more. And yeah, they're putting people in prison who was responsible for it. I'm just making the point that these governments have an axe to grind against us for things that we have done in regards to intermingling in their politics. No, we didn't do ourselves a good service in this. And instead of making friends and relationships around the world, we're making enemies. Those enemies are around us. And I'm making the point that we have pushed those groups, some of which wouldn't otherwise be together against us. One of these has to do with Iran, and specifically Iran, because this is an interesting case here. Psaki is being asked a question about Iran. They're basically saying, look, the deal, they're not going to accept the deal either way. Now, this is when I wish I was there. And I'm realizing that Jen Psaki is a horrible person because she realizes these guys are idiots. And she knows that she can introduce information and not be asked the most rational, reasonable question on the planet. And she just moves on to the next person and nobody raises their hand. And I'm left angry and incomplete because I want to know her answer. She's so good at this. Like, it's hard to explain. When I first started watching Psaki do this, I was like, all right, this is a heavy bit of propaganda that this woman is putting out. But then I started looking at it differently. I thought to myself, you know what? It's like Alex Jones in a way. She's doing a job. And on her job, just like if I was on radio, somebody was on television, she has this person that she plays. That's herself, but tweaked a little bit for the exposure. She has to put on her best face. So the way that she is engaging with you is her best face forward. And she has to explain away things that are uncomfortable, dance away from stuff that's greatly uncomfortable. And she has to, number one, protect her boss. Protect my boss. And she does it day after day after day, regardless of whatever the information that comes out, whether it's a good day, whether it's a damaging day. She has to come out there and protect her boss. Sometimes the media, most of the time that I've seen it, docile. But every so often, there may be something out there, a story that bites. But the thing is, she knows what I know, that there's a range of conversation that the media orients around, either because they want access, either because they don't think outside those bounds. Maybe, and I suspect some of them aren't bright enough to think outside those bounds and believe that this is their world. But she knows that the world goes beyond that. But she knows that they're going to stay within the boundaries. So there are things that they can say, or she can say, that I would object to, that I would point out that I think is somewhat wrong, or there's a contrary point of view that mainstream media would never bring up. I have a question in the way that this goes. And I feel like I'm cheated when I don't get to see her give her best answer for the best question. It's kind of like chess. A person makes a move, what is the best reply to this particular move? Well, in this very specific case, she is making moves every time somebody questions her. But they're not adversarial in the way that I think media should be. And so this is not a hostile environment in the kind of way I think media should be. It's docile lambs asking docile questions. Some are important, some are not so much. I want to know two things. She really should be asked on the question of Iran whether or not it was a mistake to pull out the deal. How do you not ask that? And I'm going to show you what I mean when she gives her question. And I want to make a secondary point that says Joe Biden is out of ideas on Iran. He is screwed. And they are looking for anything that would allow him to save face to extricate themselves from that situation. The reality of it is, Joe Biden was part of the Obama administration. And if, let's say, something happened, Joe Biden would probably still be with the JCPOA, probably wouldn't touch it, wouldn't think about it. And it's probably too low energy to do anything, or to not to do anything about it, even if he wanted to. So, the fact that Trump pulls out creates somewhat of a practical problem for Joe Biden. I don't want to start a war with Iran. They are upping their enrichment. And they are basically saying, you have just taken a muscular policy with us for 4 years. We're still here. We're not changing anything. And fuck you. And Joe Biden is is going to do what? Is he going to become more muscular than Trump in dealing with Iran? Is he going to try a putsch attempt? What is he going to do? Is he going to pay the MEK, one of these bands, give him $1 billion to try to overthrow the country? I don't think he's going to do any of that. And because I don't think he's going to do any of that, he has a problem. Iran is saying get rid of all of the sanctions. Joe Biden is going to do what? It's a practical problem. From the standpoint of Iran, all of the moderates have been burned. I said this for years. There is nobody to make that deal. When the moderates came out, they said, look, trust us. We're the moderates. We know what the fuck we're talking about. And we're going to make a deal with the United States. We're going to shake their hand. We're going to deal with this deal. And yes, there's some of these things that's a pain in the ass. There's some of these things that we shouldn't even have to abide by. And this deal is probably more for in favor of Israel and everything else. But fair enough. We give rid of the sanctions. We take the ass lip parts of the deal and we deal with it. And the hardliners whispered, they're going to fuck you over. You can't trust them. Trump gets in office and the hardliners are right. The moderates get burned. The moderates were wrong. The U.S. was an untrustworthy actor. And so who is on the other side in the context of Iran that is going to come out and says, well, wait a minute. We should trust America one more time. I believe they are honest actors after all. Nobody's going to do that. Nobody in their right mind. The weird part is that the American public or that the American government, even the American media, would never question the integrity of America in regards to the deals that they make. Meaning, nobody is going to point out that we just broke a deal. Aren't we untrustworthy after breaking a deal? And if we just broke that deal, which we did, and we're trying to go to somebody else to make a deal, why would they trust us in the context of a deal? Now, we don't see ourselves in that way. We just look at it and say, hey, they should make a deal with us. We're America. Why won't they make a deal with us? Because you broke the last one. And the fact that the people who were there that could have made that deal got burned, well, those people at this point are sitting in the corner with their thumb in their ass. That's assuming they have a job at all now at this point, considering that they were so very wrong. In fact, Soleimani was killed. You had all of the other people that were killed that were associated with the, if I'm not mistaken, the Quds Force commander. You had scientists that were killed. The high pressure strategy that was basically put on the country, the sanctions that were added that were basically killing people because they couldn't get access to drugs. The question that honestly should have been asked to Psaki, well, let's do this. Welcome. Slightly scattered. Sorry. To the soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you enjoyed this content, please like, share, and subscribe. You can always support this content through PayPal or Patreon. This content is brought to you by you, and I appreciate you the opportunity or allowing me the opportunity to do it. Yeah, I get annoyed sometimes with the way that the questions go, where somebody would ask the question, and the question would make sense from the standpoint of a starter question. But from the standpoint of an adversarial media, the starter question, especially if she asks it or answers it in a particular way, there are interesting follow-ups. And oftentimes they just never use them. For example, take this. Let's look at this. One is from today.
A quick one on foreign policy. Iran has come out and basically already rejected a proposal that you haven't even put on the table yet about relaxing some of the sanctions against them to get them to come to the table. They say all of the sanctions need to be relaxed before they'll consider any changes on enrichment. Is there any point to putting a proposal on the table if it's already going to be a non-starter?
Well, we remain committed to pursuing a diplomatic process to determine a way forward. Sometimes that takes some time, and we certainly have found that in the past as it relates to negotiations with Iran. We remain ready to re-engage in meaningful diplomacy to achieve a mutual return to compliance with the JCPOA commitments. And that offer to discuss and engage is on the table.
Mutually come to our commitments. Isn't that kind of weak from the standpoint of America? I mean, think about what I'm saying for the moment. And yes, I'm using the term weak, but I have a point. we have no capacity to effect our will in a muscular fashion in this. And so Trump has expended the bullets out of the gun. Because again, where are you going to escalate from where Trump was going with this particular policy? And so if you're not going to escalate from where Trump is going, you are somewhat flaccid in the wind, just standing there. Right? Well, so what is the problem here? She has no capacity to give an answer to this question in any real way. Then we look to mutually come to the agreement. It has to be mutual. Because the thing is, if Joe Biden goes back to the deal in the way that he should go back to the deal, Republicans are going to scream, "Oh my God, he's given in to Iran. He's capitulating to Iran. He's weak. He's weak. Look at him. He's giving up to Iran." That's what they're going to do. They're going to scream it. They're going to scream it to the hilt. And that is not necessarily something that Joe Biden wants. By the same token, the Iranians, like I said, the moderates are no longer there. They are not going to capitulate because they can't capitulate. How can you accept sanctions when the other person was wrong? Meaning you know they were wrong. They created that pressure campaign. All of that stuff was out of whole cloth. And yet they did it anyway, even up to the point of murdering some of your people. Why and who can accept this policy of saying, yes, we'll accept keeping some of these sanctions on, or for that matter, we'll accept changing some of the rules of the deal to make it more difficult for us? Why would they do that? How could they do that? They haven't accepted it up to this point because none of them in their political situation can accept anything like that. Nor should they, by the way. Nor should they. I wish. God knows I wish. Because look, Biden at this point is looking to save face. How do I extricate myself from this? By getting back to the deal somehow without getting called weak. And he has no idea how to do that. And Iran is not going to be a partner in doing that. The question that should have been asked to Jen Psaki here was, well, wait a minute. Why should Iran go back to the deal? I mean, it was the United States that pulled out of the deal, right? And if it was the United States that pulled out first, shouldn't it be the United States that go back to the deal? How's that not fair? That should be followed up with whatever she answers with, was it wrong for the United States to pull out of the deal? And if it was wrong to pull out of the deal, all of the actions that took place under that model, the killing of Soleimani, for example, how should we consider those acts? Nobody will ask that, because from the American perspective, all of that stuff was valid. All of this stuff was valid. It was perfectly okay. Their people are less than ours. And because their people are less than ours, they're like video game characters. They're expendable. They're not really real people when they get rubbed off. It's like so far away when somebody gets knocked off the map that it's not even like a real person that gets knocked off the map. They're not even real. They're just, digits or something. I mean, this is almost, brutally kind of how it's penned. In honest to God, real terms, the United States pulled out of the JCPOA. The United States, after pulling out of the JCPOA, tried to get Iran to change the tenets of a deal that 7 other nations agreed to. The patsies, the vassal states of the United States around the world, accepted this nonsense, as opposed to standing up for Iran, who stayed with the deal for another year. Instead of standing up for Iran and saying, wait, the United States cannot, should not put sanctions on Iran. Iran is correct in this. No, they didn't do that. They shook their fists and said, Iran better stay with the tenets of the deal. It was astonishing to see it. Because in honest to God real terms, the only one that was standing with the terms was Iran. Everybody else was on full bore propaganda mode. The U.S. is breaking the terms of the deal flagrantly, radically so. Iran is staying with the terms, and yet those governments attacked Iran. Then those governments couldn't in no way protect Iran from the United States and the sanctions that it was imposing. Again, another betrayal. The only party in this that has been correct and earnest, for fuck's sake, is Iran. And that's the honest to God truth. And the American media would never tell you that, nor will they ever see it in those terms. It is something that is just out of view. This American context just doesn't allow for it. It's very strange and very bizarre. No one would ever ask her that. They should ask her that. It's a good question. And, you know, how can you not ask her? Why is it wrong why is it right for the U.S. not to go back to the JCPOA first? And look, is Biden not going back just for the politics of it all? All things being equal, does he think it was a mistake that Trump pulled out of the JCPOA? I'm curious about that question. What's wrong with that question? I'm curious about that question. But they would never ask that. And like I said, this answer is so weak. And I don't mean weak in a bad way. It's an honest answer. And I don't necessarily mind the honest answer. I'm just making the point that we've gotten to the point where he acknowledges, Biden understands that within the context and the framework of the world that the United States was running by, especially under Trump, even under Obama, they wanted Iran to change that deal. They wanted them to lose. And despite the fact that Iran was losing all of these tens of thousands of people from COVID symptoms and everything else with the blocking of the drugs and the access to medications, they never capitulated. There was nobody there to capitulate in the context of the political space. Not only did they not capitulate, they've now signed a deal with China, which I would imagine is going to give them some level of stability in the context of the world. What the United States has also done has forced China's hand on some level to act as a peer and as a balancing act for the U.S. I don't necessarily think China had that particular point of view prior. I honestly think, at least the way it looked, they were into this thing of win-win agreements, but it seems like they're getting far more boisterous in regards to the international stage. I suppose when one country says you're committing genocide, and I suspect that they realize that the point of view of the U.S. is win-win, zero-sum. It's not win-win things. I mean, look at what took place with the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union went belly up, and the United States basically picked over the carcass to the tune of tens of hundreds of thousands of Russians. But China is not the Soviet Union. And honestly, the bloc between the two countries are pretty goddamn stable. At the very least, it looks that way, especially with China being the strong point within the context of this union. Russia within the military technology and the political and military acumen. China with the industrial might. And yeah, with the Belt and Road Initiative, you have all of these other countries for them to sell their goods. And yeah, the trade relationships that they've created is going to create a powerful outcome. The problem with the U.S. in this case is that they've spent 20 years blowing shit up. Instead of investing in their people, investing in their economy, investing in their railway, their infrastructure, their technology, we had an edge and we let that edge go because people wanted to make profits as opposed to deal with the real material concerns of human beings. So, yeah, there's that. But nobody's going to ask that the question to Psaki. Psaki knows the one that's going to ask that question to Psaki. She would say, we should go back into mutual agreement. And nobody would say, well, wait a minute, how's that fair? They didn't pull out of it. You'll pull out of it. And she would say, well, that was Trump. And somebody should say, well, that's America. There's no I in team. There's no I in the USA. It's USA. It's us, all of us. When Trump was acting, he was acting as head of the United States government. He made those choices. And the weird part is the media, when looking at those choices, still wouldn't entirely criticize those choices all that hard. Even the killing of Soleimani. It was very, very weird. It was a radically illegal act. And yet, nobody, and even the American public, couldn't look at that and say, they just murdered a guy. Or broad television almost. And they accepted they murdered the guy. And they don't even make a justification all that much for it. Just, there was an imminent attack at some point that was going to happen. So we had to, we had to strike. It's very weird. It's very strange. And nobody cares. And we accept that as just kind of a way of operation in this country. It's very, very fucking weird. I don't quite get it. But, like I said, nobody would answer that because nobody see that as a question. Luca, JT, you have to stop gargling with the old razor blades. Yeah, I know, man. No, man. This is my COVID hairdo. You know, the funny part, I'm going to get to the point where we're going back to the office, I think, within 2 weeks. No, 2 months, give or take. So all of this is going to have to come off. All of this is going to have to come off. Nihilism is bad. I don't think I'm nihilistic. At least, not entirely. I do think things are zero-sum. I mean, look. Honest to God, reality. Take away everything else. There's some people that have a point of view that says there are events and things that there's this planet and there are people that are on this planet. There are resources. Period. And within the context of those resources, some of those things can be manipulated, but they just have to be manipulated in different ways. Sometimes it's cash, sometimes it's political influence, sometimes it's propaganda, whatever. You have all of these things at your disposal. And sometimes these people sit in a position where they don't entirely care whether the decisions that they make, meaning, yeah, we'll invest $1 billion and to take that guy off, despite the fact that 500,000 people are going to die. What we will do, however, is in 20 years, after Assad is no longer there, we'll have a government that will be on our side. So, in the fold of it all, the people who are living 50 years out in the government that we have would be better off. So, you know, it justifies the act of killing 500,000 people in this process. Yes, that's pretty fucking disgusting. That doesn't necessarily stop the people from looking at the globe in those terms, in those zero-sum terms. If you have to knock some people off, fair enough. It's just part of the game. No right or wrong. Action and consequence. That point of view, honestly, is the bare bones, honest reality point of view. Everything else is subordinate to that point of view. And I know that sounds brutal, but it is true. We can have all sorts of things like values and saying, okay, this is the way I'm going to behave because I think this is the way that society needs to behave in order for us to function with one another. But that's a value system. And a value system is a choice on some level. Yes, it's imposed. It's a choice on some level. And there are people that can have a value system that don't believe in that at all and believe in I get mine regardless of what takes place for me to get mine. That's just an honest point of view. It's just so happened that those types like John Bolton get into positions of authority and they make those kind of grand decisions of, hey, let's invest money into that group that is going to put pressure on that government, and we can put money into those groups in order to, again, undermine that particular government in order to get the effect that we want in that country. Hey, who cares that there are going to be protests and all of those people are going to get killed? If we can change the government into what we want, we're good. That's harsh, and that's true. It's true. I mean, I don't know how people can tell me that don't disagree with it. It's cynical, yes. But think about your world for the moment. The United States have gone around and pretended that a man that wasn't president of Venezuela, pretended that the guy was president of Venezuela, that he was the leader of that country. Nancy Pelosi gets up there, stumbles over it because she knows in her head that this is full of shit. Doesn't stop her from still saying, well, this is the guy we consider to be president of Venezuela. How ludicrous is this? We're pretending as if Maduro has lost an election and that he doesn't have the legitimacy, etc. Now, we did the same thing to Hugo Chavez. It was BS. We did the same thing to Morales. It was BS. At some point, we need to look at what is taking place in regards to this history that keeps repeating and realize, okay, maybe they're lying about that. How can you not come to the conclusion that they're potentially lying about it after you see what they did in Bolivia and the way they talk about it now? They're lying. They're lying. So, in pretending that somebody is president of a country that the guy's not, the guy that's not president of the country goes in and pretends to have an uprising and has a few military vehicles and the people in them get caught almost immediately. He was willing to go and kill people in order to take power. You have another situation where this guy, Clown, signs a contract with mercenaries for them to, special forces, go into the country, capture military bases, and use weapons and whatever, they can muster to kill, capture, and do whatever necessarily to go through rivers of blood to get their hands on Maduro, to take power, to put that clown in power. That's the guy who we're saying as ruler of a country. We're talking about a shallow. It's not even pretending anymore. It's not even pretending. Like the pretense of what Reagan was doing, for example, is gone. Where he has to come out with the Iran-Contra affair and says, okay, look, if buck stops with me, I didn't really know that we were, selling weapons in order to try to knock over those governments. I didn't know that. I didn't know that. And then you go to Obama, where the New York Times will report it. It's like, wait a minute. These guys are admitting that the president of the United States was trying to knock over a country. Trump comes out and says it. Yeah, we're trying to knock over the country. He gets more brazen. I'm stealing the oil, by the way. Stealing the oil, by the way. And on top of stealing the oil, says, yes, I gave the order to burn the crops. Just for fucks. Just for fuck's sake. That's astonishing. Those are war crimes. Nobody cares. Nobody cares. Nobody cares about the war crimes. It's astonishing. That's all. It's amazing. It's this double standard that takes place. But in the case of Maduro, they're trying to get that guy out of office like ferociously. And if you look at Evo Morales, you have direct, clear evidence of CIA involvement with people basically saying, yes, we were helped to put this man in prison illegally. Nobody cares. Nobody cares. So the same thing is true in Bolivia. Nobody cares. Same thing is true in Honduras. Nobody cares. And the U.S. will stand up with a straight face and say, we learn from our mistakes. We just get better and better each year. And so, yes, they could say that we do this, but we just get better. And it's like, but you don't learn from your mistakes. You're bitching about all the people at the border. And again, the press only allows a certain amount of thought. So they don't go beyond these two lines of they're people of broken countries at our border. What is Joe Biden going to do? And they stop there. That's the line of debate. What is Joe Biden going to do? Joe Biden said he could let all of these people in. What is he going to do? What is he going to do? He takes in the kids. But they never necessarily say, well, wait a minute. Why are they here? Why are these countries broken in this way? Joe Biden may say, I'm going to give money to these countries. No, motherfucker. You're talking about reparations to those countries. If you're talking about the coups that you've been knocking over, we've been knocking over those governments for years. Or if you're talking about putting in the dictators, the bloody dictators that were in those countries. And even Carrera, Ecuador's president, Moreno gets pushed, squeezed into all of these positions to basically fuck over Assange in one case, and not to mention sell Assange out to the river and sell his own country down the river. It's astonishing. I guess my point is, it's so blatant at this point. It's not even this thing of hidden. It's just, yes, this is our policy from here on out. This is the way we function in the world. And the press can't see it at all. Oblivious. Totally oblivious. All right, let's see. Kevin Slime, can we test? Can we at least give Biden a chance? I have. There's a major push from Israel, Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states, and politicians here in America to go to war with Iran. Yes, there is. Yes, there is. And the question becomes, where does Biden stand on that front? And I got to be honest, I don't know. I mean, the JCPOA was looked at as the way to keep America out of the war. If you remember, this was Obama dodge on this kind of fighting or escalating with Iran. It's like, we got the deal, everybody's good, we can go and do our other stuff, Iran gets the sanctions moved, we get at the very least the countries in the world to know that nothing is taking place here. Despite the fact that Israel has nuclear weapons and Iran has said over and over again that they don't have them. There's a level of racism associated with that, not to mention political grandstanding. we are the people with a better point of view where the nuclear weapons are safe with us, despite the fact that we are the ones that are attacking everyone else around the globe. It's awesome. Trump comes in and kills the JCPOA. And kills it in a way that you can't reinstate it. Because an American president would have to be able to do the right thing on moral reasons, ethical reasons, and just being somewhat of a statesman and bring the country back into agreement with the deal. Unless they can find some kind of political wrangling that gets him into the deal while allowing to save face on that deal. If that saving face has anything to do with Iran basically eating crow or eating some kind of sanctions or anything else, they're going to tell you to fuck off. Politically, they can't do it, nor do they want to do it. It has to be America. Iran is also adding the ticking clock of increasing the amount of enrichment of uranium. Again, they're not doing it because they're trying to make a bomb. They're doing it because they're trying to make a fucking point. We pulled out the deal. We end up killing their people. And hence the question of what is Biden going to do? I mean, again, if this was the device that they used to stop a war with Iran, what is Biden going to do? I know you think I'm hitting Biden pretty hard on this, but you see the point that I'm getting at here. Biden is in a position where he has to do something. If this deal was the thing that stopped the war, okay, are you going to go back to the deal that stopped the war? And if these guys are pressing Biden to do something, and Iran is basically saying, look, you need to resolve this. You caused this. And honestly, they should want more. A pound of flesh on top of it, considering. But their demand is pretty straightforward. Go back to the deal. Go back to the sanctions. If you go back to the deal, we'll come back into compliance. Period. So, Kevin, I don't necessarily think I'm being unfair to Biden here. I guess, if Biden really is trying to stop a war with Iran, he will go back to the deal. Now, if he's trying to figure out, how do I not look weak in this position? If I go back to the deal without getting anything in concession from Iran, they're going to call me weak. They're going to call me weak. They're going to wag their finger at me. They're going to say Iran is eating my lunch, and Iran is getting the better of me, and Iran is et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. He doesn't want that. He hates that. Democrats hate that in general, because that's what Republicans call them all the time anyway. And coming after Trump, that is the last thing that you want. The reality of it is, coming after Trump, you actually do want that ticket difference in foreign policy. And you can be somewhat aggressive and not necessarily still end up in a situation of wars all over the place. You just need to be able to enunciate what the hell you're trying to do to the country so it would understand. If you're trying to bring down the hysteria of a war, yeah, you go back to the deal, you explain to the country why you did what you did. Republicans will scream bloody murder that you're being taken advantage of. But again, your point is less war. Trump pulled out of the deal. Trump broke an international agreement. We are going back to the deal to go into compliance. We are not going to have wars. We almost got into a war with an illegal strike that Donald Trump took when he killed Soleimani. Yeah, why not? I mean, you could say that, we want to look weak, don't want to look weak. Fair enough. But at this point, we did something that we as a country should not have done. And this notion of the press pretending that we didn't, I don't know. I'm sick of it. I'm sick of it. Michael Williams, it's not the deal, right. It's not the ideal pure imperialism anyway. How are we to demand sovereign nation what to do? Right. There should be no deal. Am I wrong? Thoughts? Yeah. Look, agreed. But Iran made the deal. But they did make the deal. But understand, what he's saying is a point. He's like, you put sanctions on this country. And you put sanctions on this country not because they were a threat to anybody, because who did they attack? They didn't attack anybody. They themselves were attacked by us. We fomented a coup because they wanted additional revenue from a source of their own product. They get the government back. It's a religious theocracy. And we never get over it once they get rid of our dictator that we put into the country. sanctions and whatnot get put into the country because we run the world order. And if sanctions being put into the country, we have a clear favorite in that particular region of the world that allows that country that we don't particularly like to be sanctioned. And all of the other vassal states who join in and say, that's the country that is problematic, despite the fact that the country that we back attacks everybody else and has nuclear weapons. It's fucking phenomenal in regards to the way that the world sees this stuff. And yes, it's somewhat alienating when I look at the world like this, but it's more true. In the context of this, they would say then, if you want some of the relief from these sanctions, here's what we need from you. Basically, we're using sanctions to elicit demands. Okay, then make the deal. And on top of making the deal, they give the U.S. what they want in this. A new president comes in because the Congress of the United States is so inept and broken that nothing gets done. And nothing gets done, honestly, on some level, for the reason that the wealth and money interests of this nation don't want anything to get done. Because at that point, what they're getting done is just the business to which they enjoy. They're going to get their tax cuts. They're going to get their revenue, the 95, 96% of their income. It's going to go to the top 1%. But look, I guess my basic point is Congress cannot get anything done from the standpoint of signing a treaty. So Obama basically just put his name on it as an executive order. Trump gets rid of it. What do they think? What does the public think? How does the government suppose to deal with that? What does the government look like after that? Do we think of these things at all when we think about Iran? No, the media doesn't seem to. And so the public itself gets this kind of weird blind spot in regards to the dialogue that we have with this nation, despite the fact that we're the ones that entirely instigated that affair. So I understand that these guys want to start a war, but the question really does boil down to, what is Joe Biden going to do? And is Joe Biden going to use the JCPOA as something to go back to? And how is he going to get back to it while saving face, which is, I strongly suspect, what he's trying to do. Otherwise, I think he would be back then. I could be wrong. Kevin Slims, diplomacy is not zero-sum game. Yes, it is. Remember, we pulled out the deal. Now we need to save face along with the Iranians. Well, sometimes it is zero-sum. I mean, because sometimes it's not about win-win. Sometimes it's about I win, you lose. I mean, that's basically what the United States wanted, right? When Trump pulled out of the deal, what did he want? He wanted them to capitulate. I want you to bend the knee. That's what he wanted. And in the context of, that was no diplomacy. There was no diplomacy within the context of that. And I got to be honest, we don't do diplomacy like that anymore. I mean, basically we have demands, and the demands are either met or not. And if the demands are not met, we just issue sanctions or some other kind of military campaign where we're killing off leaders. That's true. That's cynical, but that is true. That is a true depiction of U.S. policy. And so, yeah, I get the U.S. want to save face with the Iranians, but if that saving face has anything to do with sanctions still being employed, the Iranians are not going to take it. Why would they take it? It is impossible for them to save face if sanctions exist. Full stop. I could be wrong, but I don't think I'm wrong on that. From the standpoint of how I think human beings behave, and when those human beings are burned from a really fucked up experience, on some level even embarrassing, then yeah, I think those people behave in a particular way, regardless of where they are. And I think they will behave in the exact way I think they are. No deal. I am emotionally there with no deal, and I am politically there with no deal, because people will punish me if I deviate from that. That's where I would be. That's where I would be. Wherever I was before, that's where I would be now. If I'm sitting on the moon looking at events. And again, I keep making the point. Russia, China, Iran have basically been aligned as a result of what we've been doing with those sanctions, with the propaganda, working with Europe and vassal states in order to basically attack other nations, be it in South America. Yeah, in 10 years, the question is, what does the world look like? And where are we in 10 years with this notion of the boisterousness that we're taking? I mean, for fuck's sake, we're saying that China is committing genocide. The hysteria of this is extreme. And it's so extreme that it's hard to look ahead and think, where do we go? I don't know. It's hysterical. And look, you might be right, Kevin. You might be right. The Iranians might say, look, we're sick of this, we're going to throw you a bone. I don't know why they would do that. I don't know why they would do that. Like I said, if even one sanction exists, then they have, on some level, taken a loss. Because keep in mind, the thing that Donald Trump wanted was for them to break and change and gives anything. I don't care if it was one nickel difference of change in that agreement. That's what he wanted. Because from his standpoint, I got them to change the deal. It wasn't about getting anything real or substantial. The point was, I'm going to win by getting them to change the deal. I win, you lose. Ha ha, fuck you. There's nothing that substantially changed. No. I just needed them to change something so I could tell the public that I changed something. Yeah, I think it's that cynical. If Joe Biden gets them to do something similar by keeping the sanction and yet them pulling out of the deal, on some level, it will still be a capitulation in a similar manner. No, whether it's Biden, whether it's Trump, no, they shouldn't do it. At least I don't think they would do it. So I could be wrong. I don't live there, so I'm not going to say they should or shouldn't do it, but I just have a hard time believing that the moderates being burned would allow that political depiction. But we will see. Up to this point, Psaki realizes that if any of the sanctions are there, the answer is no. And I gave you my explanation why I think the answer is no. And whether or not Biden can come up with something that allows them to save face while simultaneously getting Iran to go back to the deal. I don't know what that is. But who knows? Like you said, diplomacy. Like, share, subscribe.